Hello and welcome to the Knowing Show. I am your host, Christene Marie. Y'all, I want to talk about honestly the topic around not just our thoughts, but what do we think particularly around God. On the Knowing Show, we talk about the four intelligences that make you and I human. It's the intellectual intelligence, the emotional intelligence, physical and spiritual intelligence. And the way that I kind of look at each one is that the soul is where our emotions live. That is where our emotional intelligence is connected, and the way that that really comes in and plays a core part in the right hemisphere of the brain. Whereas our intellect, our mind, it has so much to do with the left hemisphere of the brain. And so, this concept of the mind, body, soul, spirit, the soul is the emotions, the mind is the intellect. And then our body, our physical intelligence is so much of what helps us kind of connect with this physical world around us. And it's kind of like flesh, right? It's a connecting point. And when I think about spirit, it is in so many ways the pathway to God, the access to something that is eternal, something that we otherwise would never know. And I know so many of us know what this is like when we're like, I don't know how I knew that, but I just knew it. And it's kind of that that layer where we somehow have access to something that we would have otherwise never known, apart from something eternal or something divine, almost miraculous, so to say. And so when we talk about this concept of what do we think about God, it's what is our actual intellectual perception around something that is spiritual. And so honestly, I'll just kind of start with my experience. I grew up in a very segmented house and segmented environment and I don't think that it was unique in any way. I think so many of us did, where it was maybe on Sundays we go to the religious environment, and then we go to school or work from 9 to 5, and then we come in and engage with our family after. So it was spirit is on Sundays, intellect is during the day, and emotions and the soul are in the evening. And we lived very compartmentalized, where we weren't living as a collective, holistic person. We were living as fragmented parts. And then that reflected in the way that we showed up on Sundays. We would leave our mind at home. And when we showed up in relationships, we weren't bringing our spirit there. Whereas you would see a whole bunch of religious people on Sundays, and then they would go home and you'd be like, wait, you were just espousing love and joy and peace yesterday or even earlier today, but now you're back home and that's nowhere to be seen. And so we saw a lack of congruency growing up and looking at our parents and also those around us who were maybe even our elders. And we just were like, what is real? What is going on? Because what I'm experiencing for reality is very different than that which is espoused from the pulpit, or even that which is espoused in early morning. And then as the day progresses, behavior gets worse and worse. And so there's been a lack of congruence and kind of through line between every single part of what constitutes a human being, that we are living in this very I don't even know if disassociated is the right word, but it's very disparate. It's very disconnected from ourselves, but then also with each other. So we hear somebody say one thing, they do another, and then they live in one regard in terms of their spirit, let's say on Sundays, and then they manifest very differently in terms of their emotions, their soul in another later in the day or later in the week. And so on the Knowing Show, we talk about activating all four of these all of these intelligences, the mind, body, soul, spirit, but it is for the sake of living holistic and integrated throughout our life, where it's not just turning on one aspect at one particular time of day or one particular day of the week, but it is bringing that consistency at every moment throughout every encounter, so that there's congruency, so that there's an ability to live holistic and integrated for the sake of love, for the sake of living in accordance with our own greatest potential and really capitalizing on that. I think one of the greatest detriments can be that we end our lives and we actually didn't walk in the fullness of our potential. I played one of my very favorite songs for my darling tonight. And there's a line in this song where it says, I want to live this one wild life. I want to rip it apart. And that line it's very visceral. It's engaging with life. It's almost kind of getting tactile with it, where it's living wholehearted. Let's living fully engaged, fully alive, fully awake in what we're grappling with and what we're contending with in life. And this question that we're talking about tonight, what do you think about God? Actually has so much to do with it, because if we're going to look at every single one of our intelligences, mind, body, soul, spirit, it is so important that we look at each one, but look at how each one relates to the other. I like to think of each intelligence effectively has a director, so that when you go to your board, each director, you're sitting with your board of directors, each one comes to the table and says, hey, this is what I know. So, what we think about God, what we feel about God, this is so interesting. It's like kind of a spiritual question. What do you think about God spiritually? But you're engaging your intellect in regards to the spiritual. You're engaging your emotions in regards to the spiritual. So, if you have experienced something emotionally damaging in regards to spirituality, that's going to come forward in terms of how you engage and show up spiritually. If you have intellectually not been able to engage spiritually, that's going to show up, and vice versa. I've seen a lot of people actually not be able to engage their mind to the greatest potential because they are so overly cultivated spiritually. It goes both ways. You can be so intellectual that you cannot engage spiritually, and vice versa. And so this whole question of what do you think about God, it actually goes beyond that to what do you feel about God? And what is, even when you hear the word God, what happens literally in your physical body? Because I am talking to more and more people who have experienced some real trauma, like spiritual trauma, that shows up in their physical body, that shows up in their emotions, and it shows up in their intellect. I've heard people tell me, I wish I could believe. I wish I could have faith in God. That sounds really comforting. That sounds really, really nice, especially when shit hits the fan and we don't have the luxury of hope. And I think hope in one sense is perhaps that. It sounds and feels like a luxury, yet perhaps it's the very lifeline that we need to be able to make it through. And so when we talk about what do you think about God, what do you feel about God, what do you actually sense in your physical body when you hear the concept of God, how do you react? And the reason, again, why that's important is because in order for us to live wholeheartedly and to experience life to the fullest possible extent, where we're not showing up with parts of us, but with all of us, it's important that we ask this, because God has everything to do with our spirituality. How do you believe that you're created? Who do you believe you're modeled after, if anything? And also, what is your old association with God? What do you actually sense in your body when you hear that word? What do you actually sense emotionally? What do you think? Because there's so much spiritual abuse that's happened in the name of God. And so for us to really think, not just, okay, what was I taught to believe about God? What is my current understanding and perception of God? But what would my ideal be when I think about God? How would I actually want to engage with the creator of the universe? There's in terms of the knowing framework, there's 3 questions that we typically go through. The first is really understanding, well, okay, who was I? What was the past in terms of how I was raised to view the world? What were the core experiences that I went through? And then all of that leads to the second question. Well, who am I today? How does the past manifest in the present? And then the third question was, okay, well, who do I want to be? What is my ideal? Just recognizing who was I, how does that show up today in the present? But then what even is my potential? So the past, present, and potential. We can do the very same iteration with the spirit. How was I raised to think about God? How does that knowledge of the past show up in the present? So maybe I've actually completely rejected that past knowledge, and maybe I show up very differently spiritually today than I did in the past. Or maybe it's very consistent. But what would the ideal look like? And y'all, this is so much of what we actually can tend to forget. And so much of why we get on here every single day is to remind ourselves of what's true. We have so much power. in reshaping the lens through which we view the world, and in reshaping our relationships with ourselves, with other people, and with God. And so as we kind of think about this question, well, what do I even think about God? What do you think for yourself? Because so much, and I was talking to my darling about this tonight, so much of what we believe has been taught to us and told to us rather than taught from within, something that we've experienced, something that we've come to know by way of revelation, by way of our own divine encounter. And rather, it's just, well, that's what they said. And so we it's like we point the finger. And so this concept of assigning blame and living as the victim actually can be the very thing that we've predicated our spirituality and religion on. And we don't even realize, because living as a victim sounds horrifying in so many ways, but sometimes living as a victim is very comfortable. Well, it's just what they said. I believe this because that's what I was told since I was a little kid. But do you know that? Do you know it? Like have this inner knowing of, you've got proof, you've got data that attests to that which you believe. And y'all, this concept goes, again, it goes beyond spirituality. It goes to the physical encounter with the world. Do you know that to be true? Or is that just what you were told? There's a concept of, the Latin root of intuition is intuere, which means to be taught from within. How much are we taught from within versus told from everyone else out there? And I'm excited to dig into today's lesson for A Course in Miracles. But before I do, I just want to jump here in the chat. Texan JSN, I'm glad to see you. Thank you for joining, Kevin. Revival. The Quiet Amp, hello. Jeff. Gallon. Good to see you. Boogie, hello. Raybar, thank you for joining. It's good to see you. Just Curious. Maya, hello. Space Jam. Y'all, I'm just going to quickly, Angelo, happy birthday. I'm glad to see you. I hope you did something fun. I'm just going to put some folks here on timeout, just so that we don't get too crazy with the chats. Eco says, you got to shout out Poland and the Polish people. Giving a shout out. Revival says, how do I continue to get deeper meaning from the same scripture to understand God's intent more clearly? I'll tell you what's worked for me. What Revival was, I had a significant change in my life when I learned to hear God's voice. And that was something that, again, it completely changed so much of my life, because I realized how much of what I believed had been shaped by what other people said and their experience, not my own. And I do believe it's absolutely very critical that we have other people around us, other people to tell us what they've encountered and what they've experienced, and to learn from others. But at the end of the day, we are accountable for our own actions. We're accountable for our belief systems. We're accountable for our words, for every behavior, every decision. And so how much of all of those pieces, my beliefs, my actions, my words, my decisions, are predicated in that which has been tested, examined, proved, has data backing it, versus I'm just taking someone else's word for it. And I realized so much of my life was according to that. And so, man, I got to tell you, this is specifically to Revival Mistaken. I really have found that the more that I actually go into any context, whether it's reading a book or reading actually scripture, I want to read it, and I really strive to read it. It's hard to do this, but I strive to read it with a completely fresh lens of like, oh, if I was reading this for the first time without someone else's interpretation, what would it mean to me? And I'll go back and I'll look at the root word. So I'll go and look at the actual genesis of the Greek word, of how it's been translated into English. And actually it's very different. And I looked at something the other day. This was about 3 weeks ago. And I sent actually a message to my parents and to my sisters. And I was like, y'all, this text that I grew up believing to be a certain thing I examined, because it was a letter. A lot of scripture in the New Testament was written as a letter. And a letter needs to be read in context of what were the people experiencing when they received this letter, what was happening when this letter was intended to be, when it was written, what was the intention behind the letter itself. And when you look at that, it completely changes the meaning. And so there's just a real humility for every single one of us if we want to know the truth. So that's a question. Do you even want to know the truth? But if we do, we have to be humble, because so much of God is just so much bigger than we could have thought and so much better than we could have dreamed. And so if I'm humble and open and asking for God to be my teacher, not my parent, not my priest, not my pastor, not my pope, but I'm asking for God to be my teacher. So it comes back to this question: what do you think about God? Do you think of God as a teacher? Do you think of God as someone safe, as a friend? Do you think of God as something holy, a creator? And all of these questions have to be sat with and considered, because otherwise the way that we engage with other people also, much less so ourselves, because I believe we're made in the image of God. I believe we're like our creator. So the way I view our creator is going to impact the way I view myself, and thus everyone around me. I love that question, Revival. Thank you so much for asking that. Let me jump down to the chat. Ross, good to see you. Thanks for joining. Um, the Quiet Amp, thank you for joining. I'm glad to see you. Ben, what do you do when religion ends up the biggest burden you don't have to carry, instead the other way around? What do you do when religion ends up the biggest burden you don't have to carry, instead of the other way around? I'm not sure. I want to make sure that I understand exactly what you're saying so I don't butcher my answer, but I I had a number of years, Ben, where I wasn't I was so mad. And so, not even just mad, I was just so devastated, I guess. My sister had a 3-week-old baby girl with her husband. They had met on Valentine's Day, their senior year of high school. And they had been married for 4 years and had a 3-week-old little girl. Her name was Alyssa Rose. And he was driving home from work and was killed instantly by a drunk driver who was going the opposite way on the highway in Houston, Texas. And I was 21 at the time, and I just, gosh, man, there's no answer for that. There's no answer for that. And so, to your point around, what did you say? You said something, it was actually really beautifully written. If it becomes the biggest burden, and I think for so much of the time, as long as we don't have as long as we're not bringing our questions and actually allowing the questions and the pain and the fear and the anger, my gosh, to come to the surface, and we don't actually get them out of us, man, do they become a burden. Man, do they become just this thing that festers inside of us and ends up eating us alive from the inside out. So I actually think that this question, what do you think about God? Us not even asking the question can perhaps be the most damaging of all, because otherwise we're sitting with all of this freaking anger and we're just like, how could you let this happen? How could my niece at 3 weeks old lose her daddy? How could my sister, who never did anything wrong, how could he, who never did anything wrong, lose his life? He was 26, all the promise in the world. And there's a Billy Joel song that says, "A good die young." And I'm like, man, now I listen to music and I just hear the pain in these words. That lends to a whole other conversation around how art, like, can you actually create good art apart from pain and suffering? But we'll talk about that another time. Y'all, it's so fascinating. Like, this question of what do you think about God has to be asked, because otherwise all of that all of the thoughts that we do have, all of the questions that we have, stay inside of us and stay suppressed until we actually get them out. There's this concept of pouring out our soul. And I really, really love that concept because we have the lymphatic system that cleanses our body full of toxins and waste, and it rinses it out every 12 hours, I think. The lymphatic system does it for our brain, where it rinses it of toxins and waste. We don't we don't have anything like that for our internal world, for our soul, for our emotions. We don't have something that cleanses it, that rids it and rinses it out. And so if we don't intentionally ask questions like this one, what do I think about God? And and man, if I really start leaning into it, man, I got a whole bunch of questions, or I got a whole bunch of feelings or emotions or a whole bunch of thoughts. How many of those are yours? How many of those are predicated on your personal experiences versus what other people told to you? The goal is that we are taught from within by our own experiences, by the voice of God, that we are actually taught. The Latin root of intuition is intuere, which means to be taught from within, versus sitting. Yes, we want to be a student of life, but how much better to be an experiential learner of life rather than sitting in the classroom, like looking out the window and hearing how good it is out there from everyone else coming in and out of the door. But to venture forth and to venture out to engage with the world in and of ourselves, it's a daring thing. I love Theodore Roosevelt's his speech in 1914 in Paris talks about going into the arena and going out and experiencing the taste of triumph and the taste of defeat. And you're going to get all the full range of emotions when you do that. You're going to know anger. You're going to know pain. You're going to know suffering. I was sitting at dinner tonight talking to my darling, and I was like, man, I think that if we were to have children understand that pain is simply part of life, same with joy. It's not like we're just trying to protect them from growing up too fast because, man, once they grow up, it's all downhill from there. No, it's joy and sorrow from the beginning all the way through to the end, and hopefully some extra joy on top of it. But we get to set the expectation for our own life. We get to choose what we're going to focus on, and we get to choose, well, what do I think about God? We get to choose that. And a lot of times we play the victim in our own life. We feel like we actually don't have much of a choice. But man, is choice perhaps, and Viktor Frankl says this in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, choice is the greatest of all human freedoms. They can strip everything else away, but they cannot strip away the freedom to choose our response. I'm just going to jump back here in the chat. Philly Day, hi from Louisiana. Hello. The gray tone, I'm glad you're here. It's so good to see you as always, my friend. Coffee, thanks for joining. Zigma, hello. Lifted, Bod, hello. Just scrolling. Life's a gift. I love that. Isaiah, hello. It's good to see you. Good to see you back. Good guy, Brady, hello. Brady, sorry. Birdie girl, hello. Coffee, KG. Devin, hello. Blessing, hello. Sauce. Just looking at these comments. There's a lot here. Asane, hello. Senseless. Bruce Wayne. I love what you wrote here. Without the pain, we wouldn't know the peace. Without the failures, we wouldn't know victory. Winning is only defined by losing. It's interesting. I was thinking, I'll sometimes, not often, but sometimes I'll do kind of one-to-one coaching with folks. And I was working with a woman, and we were talking about how in order to have highs and peaks in life, we therefore, by definition, we have to have valleys. And so we were kind of examining this and bringing the concept of like, okay, well, what does it look like? Okay, so you've got the peaks, you've got the valleys, but what's your baseline? And my goal is actually that my baseline is actually pretty high. It's pretty good, so that the peaks are extra, extra peaks on top of that, but then the valleys actually never go that low. But if you're going to have a super, super low valley and then a super, super high peak, well, then your baseline has to be pretty flat. Whereas if you have some nice curves and some nice dips, it's not too radical, it's not too drastic, but it brings just this concept of like, y'all, do we have the ability to go up and down, and the willingness to experience that up and down of life? I was speaking to a woman and she lost her son. I think he passed away. I think he passed away within 2 hours of being born. And she's sitting there holding her baby boy. And she made a decision right then and there that she wasn't going to feel anything anymore, because feeling the pain was too much. And that's entirely her choice, right? But to feel that depth of pain, here's the thing that I didn't know when my brother-in-law was killed. I didn't know that to feel that depth of pain and to go there, to actually feel it. Because I actually didn't let myself feel that amount of pain for many years. I avoided that day. I tried to avoid the pain as much as possible. So I threw myself into doing. Because if we're so busy doing and being a human doer, we don't have to be a human being. Because the being is so often to do with the feeling, and it's pretty dang painful if we're going to actually care about anyone or anything in life. And so once we start moving into the human being side of things, we start to have those peaks and those valleys. But the thing is that if we're avoiding and cutting off the valleys, we're also cutting off all of the peaks. Because for every death, there is also a new life. It was so weird to have this juxtaposition of my brother-in-law's death and then my niece's life. Like, I hadn't met my baby niece. She was 3 weeks old when my brother-in-law was killed, and I hadn't met her yet. She was in Houston with my sister. And so my brother-in-law getting killed, my sister came back the next day. And so, I'm meeting this like precious little angel baby at the same time grieving her father's death. And it was so devastating and yet so filled with joy. Like, I will never forget that moment of holding her, your first ever niece or nephew. I don't know how many of you have nieces or nephews, but there's something just so, it was so wonderful and so devastating all at the same time. So if we're shutting off our beingness, our ability, and I really actually mean that truly, so much of what constitutes a human being is the ability to create, to feel, to experience life, to think. And so if we're cutting off 50% of us, which is the feeling part, and solely focused on the doing part, well, then we're actually not the human being. And thus we're cutting ourselves off from having access to even love in and of itself. And then we wonder why are relationships so hard, or why have I never really experienced love? And it's, well, if we're protecting ourselves from the pain of loving, there's a high likelihood we're probably never going to be able to receive love on the other side of it. And thus it creates for an incredibly lonely life. Just jumping back here into the chat. Agnostico, I just read your chat. That's very, very interesting perspective. Coffee, thank you. I'm glad you subscribed, and will come hang out with us again soon. MF Ewan, I'd love to hear more of your thoughts on that. Michael, I love this. Choice is often tempered by responsibility, so it's not always as easy as it sounds. Isn't that the truth? My gosh, I love that you said that. Just because we have the choice doesn't mean it's going to be easy. But I think recognizing we have the choice is really, truly the first step. Viktor Frankl in his book says between stimulus and response is choice. And so often responsibility is laced within the response. So it's like, okay, my first responsibility is to choose. And then it's like the internal responsibility and then the external responsibility. I really, really like that. Um, See, some of these are funny comments. Birdie girl, I'm seeing your comment, and I'm not diving into that tonight because I don't want to go too far off into that topic, but I just want to acknowledge that I do see it. Jasmine, uh, Revival, talking about coaching, there's there's been there's been a couple, well, I'll just say that there's a couple different ways that that manifests. A lot of it is actually more so to do with asking questions and helping people dig deeper for themselves, because that's what I did. That was my experience, where I just took so much time to really look in the mirror. And y'all, when I started looking in the mirror, I don't know, for those of you who have done this and really done the work, I'm curious to hear your perspective. But man, there's been so much freedom that comes on the other side of knowing the truth. But in order to know the truth, we actually have to square off with that person in the mirror. And that requires time. And so sometimes with, I don't even like to use the word coaching, but sometimes the coaching is really just dedicated time for looking in the mirror, having somebody else ask us the questions, and then being brave enough to answer them, and to take action as a result of it too. There's an inbuilt accountability with meeting somebody every single week and knowing, am I going to fulfill on what I promised I would do, and keep up with that myself. I have this the knowing community where it's small right now. It'll probably be launched sooner in the next couple of weeks, hopefully, Lord willing. But I have a WhatsApp community where it's small, but we do these 61-day challenges with each other. And that's all it is right now. Everyone commits to something, and then I'll check in sometimes to see how everyone's doing. But it is entirely, will I keep my word against myself? And will I honor that? But when you're meeting with someone one-to-one every single week, and you know that you've got to answer for your actions, there's an inbuilt kind of a desire to hold to a higher standard because somebody else is holding you to it and somebody else is believing in you. So that's more so of what it is in terms of having an external perspective, looking in the mirror, having questions asked of you that force you to go deeper, and then also having inbuilt accountability and a standard to which you're willing to adhere and hold yourself to. Just scrolling down. Oh, great. You're wonderful. Thank you. Austin, I'm glad you're here. Sammy, this is live. Thanks for joining. Religion. That's so funny. Jose, hello. Thanks for joining. Reese, I've never played Rocket League. Just curious. Wow, that's incredibly profound. He says she says, I once had an out of body experience. After that, I looked at death as just a simple transition. Suffering seems very personal in one's own understanding. What a beautiful way to look at suffering. It's a personal experience. It's a very you said it seems very personal in one's own understanding. Y'all, this is where, and I actually have this written out in my book. My book hasn't been published yet, but I wrote this out in my book that because no one else has been in your shoes, no one else will ever know your own suffering, your own experience. And so our ability to actually care for ourselves is probably one of the most important things we can cultivate, because otherwise we're all walking around with open wounds that haven't been healed to or tended to, because no one else can tend to them the way that we can. So to the point of therapy and coaching and counseling and all of that, I think that that's important, but it's all for the purpose of learning to be our own doctors. Like I bought the domain. I don't know if I'll ever do anything with it, but it's healing on our own. Like we need to learn to be our own physicians in so many ways. Community is so important. And that's one of the ways where it's like, oh, I think I actually need to go. We self prescribe, okay, it's time to go out and get community. We self prescribe, oh, it's time to rest and sleep. We self prescribe, oh, it's time to go to the gym and like let out this pent out frustration. Or, oh, we self prescribe, okay, I need to actually go and read and cultivate my mind more. Or we self prescribe, I'm going to go actually and attend this event because I think I actually need to level up. But if we don't know who we are, there is no way we can start self prescribing our own healing mechanisms that get us to the next level for our own growth, for our own advancement in life, to getting us to the level that we can and that we should to be able to fulfill in our calling and to be able to care for our families and lead the way that we could if we were to do that, to know ourselves well enough to then self administer our own prescriptions. I'm just scrolling down. DL. Dugog, hello. Ronald. Zeus. Thank you for joining, Zeus. Goodbye. Dadesek, hello. Dadesek, hello. Dadesek, how do you describe it? What's your definition? Because I have a response, but it all depends on definitions. Adam, hello. Good to see you. Hello from Orange County. I'm glad you're here. Let me scroll back up because I think I missed a couple of chats here. Ivan, hello. Thank you. Thank you for joining. Lifted. I love some of your comments here. There's a lot here. I love it. Revival says, I have WhatsApp. I was thinking about this earlier today. We're wrapping up our 61-day challenge. So if you want to join the next one, I have to do the math on like when I'm doing a 61-day challenge every quarter. And so if you want to join the next one, I have to do the math. If we were to end September 30th, I guess we'll start it probably late July. So I'll let you guys know when we're ready to start the next cohort, but it would be fun, or next challenge, I guess. But I'd love to have you on there. Ronald, hello. Thanks for joining. Nashville, hello. 1, 2, 3, 4. Thanks for joining. Jack, hello. Oh, Datesec, then no, I'm not at all. Datesec asked if I was a feminist, and I asked for his definition of feminist, and he says women who hate men and think they're pigs and think they're useless. So no, I'm not. If that's your definition of feminist, I'm not. I'm so grateful for, it's, how do I even want to say this? I think both, man. It's funny. I've never been asked this question with this definition before. So I want to be careful because it feels like it's a trap. I am so grateful for my darling. He opens the door for me when we go to dinner, and I will cook dinner for him. And I actually, when he opens the door for me, I get in, and then I lean over and I open his door. And he cooked steak tonight while I made the side. So I think that there's something really beautiful in helping each other out and not siloing people into roles. And I think gratitude is probably the most important thing in any relationship. And so if I'm going into a relationship expecting something of someone and then not having gratitude, I think that that's going to be the fastest way to to lose that relationship. And I think it can be any relationship. I watch it in business. I serve as fractional chief marketing officer for a number of trades businesses, and that's probably one of the fastest ways that they lose the integrity of the unity that is necessary for growth within an organization. One particular company, they're working on getting 45 million this year, and the lack of unity can be the fastest way to get through to cut through that fast trajectory for growth. They went from 11 million to 30 million, and now they're on their way to 45 million this year. And apart from unity, we're not going to be able to make those leaps and bounds in a business, but also, and how much more so, in our personal relationships. And so what are the things that cut down unity? And a lot of times, y'all, this is why we need to cultivate our inner intelligences: intellectual, emotional, spiritual, physical. Because if we are not at all aligned and able to control our own selves, then we're going to be having anger from the past coming into the present and acted out towards somebody else, God forbid our boss or our spouse or partner. And then that's going to bring so much, it breaks off the unity that is necessary for growth. And again, that's not just in the professional, but it's the personal and vice versa. And so to your question, I think that there's so much damage that's been done when we start looking at somebody as someone other than, rather than we're in this together, we're a team. And that, speaking of my brother-in-law who was killed, that was one thing that he always said to my sister. He would say, "Why are we fighting? We're on the same team." And that concept of being on a team, actually, the very first real big girl job I had, I was working at a marketing agency, and the CEO and founder said, he was like, "I never hire anyone who's never played sports before because they don't understand the team mentality." So to go into any kind of relationship, from a business to professional, anywhere in between, that semblance of unity is so incredibly important for us to be able to grow as an organization or a family. And so, circling all the way back and making this a full circle moment, what do you think about God? If you think that God is someone to be afraid of, somebody that I need to be fearful of and have distance from, and somebody that I need to protect myself from, then more than likely I'm going to show up that way in my personal relationships. Because the way we view God is so often going to reflect in the way we view ourselves and the way we view others. The way we view ourselves is also going to show up in the way we view God and others. It's there. We can never think that we can ever get away with being compartmentalized. We cannot have a core belief about one area of our life and not have it impact the others. So if we hold a core belief about ourselves, about God, about other people, about business, about our personal life, about our family, if we hold a core belief about our value, then that is going to show up in every area, across every level of analysis. Just jumping back here in the chat. Mike says, "I'm grateful for every day that God gave me." Oh, I love this. Be Positive says, "More important than gratitude is listening and understanding." I'm so glad you brought that in. I don't know the hierarchy of what's more important, but I think all of those are so, so, so important. So I'm so grateful you brought that in. Agnostico, I think that's such a beautiful perspective. Carl, I love that too. That's so good. Peter, I'm just looking at your comments. Batman, wow, that is beautifully stated. Trust is the foundation of any relationship. Without it cracks and will appear. No. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Trust is the relationship of all foundation of all. No, we're going to start all over. Trust is the foundation of all relationships. Without it cracks. Without it, cracks will appear and it will all come crashing down. Then for sure, the team thing. Yes, that's so good. And I'm so glad you brought up trust. If we're going to talk about the hierarchy of what's most important, I actually think it's more so perhaps relevant to talk about the ramifications. So if we are, to your point earlier about, in addition to gratitude, be positive, it's also listening and understanding. Trust is the ramification of that. And then that's the foundation upon which you're building your house and your relationships and your businesses, and it grows from there. Y'all, this conversation around emotional intelligence and cultivating those emotional skill sets it's under discussed in so many ways. We don't take the time to really examine, what do I believe? And how do I engage in relationships in a healthy way? How do I make sure that I don't go get fired? That I'm actually in control of myself. So I love this conversation, and there's so much here. Zorro, I'm just looking at your comment here. Tommy, good morning. I'm so glad. Good morning from sunny and beautiful Sweden. It's hot today, 32 Celsius. I've never been to Sweden, but it just looks beautiful. Peter, I'm sure you have a lot of experiences that have led to your sharing here. Jose, thank you. Thank you so much for your note. Corporal says, it will always be a mystery. I agree with you. It will be a mystery for sure. Mike says, unconditional love and your partner is your best friend. You have your partner for life, but if your husband or wife is not your best friend, you'll never make it in life together. I've heard that same thing, that if you're not best friends, it's almost like you're doomed to fail. Zorro says, quit using we, you are not us. And Zorro, it's so funny. I actually intentionally use we for the purpose of community, and I do it in my business. I've got a couple businesses, and I always say we, because we win together and we lose together. And so that's the approach that I take to life, of we're in this together and we're a team, kind of like what my brother-in-law said. Why are we fighting? We're on the same team. And so I use that colloquial term, but feel free to remove yourself from the phraseology if you don't like it. Benny says, you don't think about God, you believe in God. That's honestly, it's an interesting take on it. I find that we do hold thoughts about God and beliefs about God. And you bring an interesting point, though. It's rather your belief in God. And so I think that that's almost like the next phase, the next question. What do you believe? Do you believe in God? So that's a good point. Charles, thanks for joining. Just scrolling down. I love that. Great tone. We said the same thing. We're a team here, sir. I love that. Corporal says, you can have inner thoughts all you want to. Y'all have a wonderful, wonderful night. Thank you so much for joining. I'm really, really grateful for this conversation tonight. There was a lot of quality comments, and I always really appreciate reading through and having our conversation be more so of a dialogue. So I'm really grateful for you guys. I'll be going live again tomorrow. Not sure what time. I haven't been going live consistently over the last couple of weeks. So it'll probably be a little bit later in the day. And frankly, it's been fun hopping on here later because there's been more people on. So I'm grateful and glad that you guys joined. I will see you tomorrow, probably in the evening. But have